What's up, guys? This is Josh here from KeepItTechie, where we learn Linux, open source, and tech one command, one concept, and occasionally one uncomfortable conversation at a time. Now, before we get started, real quick, if you appreciate fact-based tech discussions that don't immediately melt into outrage or culture war discussions, go down and hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who actually cares about open source. Because today, man, I tell you, we talking about something crazy. The Python Software Foundation, a $1.5 million federal grant, DEI, and one of the strangest, most confidently incorrect reactions I've seen from a tech creator in a while. And look, this is not about whether you like Python. It's not even about whether you like DEI. This is about how misinformation spreads when commentary replaces comprehension. And yes, we're gonna have a little fun along the way because honestly, some of these arguments deserve it. But anyway, let's slowly break this all the way down. All right, so the Python Software Foundation, or PSF, is a nonprofit organization. They're not a megacorp. They're not a Silicon Valley villain lair. Just 14 people running infrastructure used by millions. And their annual budget is about $5 million, which in tech terms is basically chump change. Now, one of their biggest responsibilities is PyPy, the Python Package Index. And so if you've ever typed pip install whatever package, congratulations, you've trusted PyPI with your system. And PyPI is a huge supply chain attack surface. Now, in early 2025, for the first time ever, the Python Software Foundation applied for a US government grant through the National Science Foundation. The purpose? Security. It had nothing to do with vibes or politics or marketing campaigns, just strictly security, specifically automated malware detection, as well as proactive package review, and simply tooling that could benefit multiple open source ecosystems. And after months of review, the proposal was recommended for funding, which is already rare. Then came the fine print, and this is where things started getting interesting. To accept the grant, the Python Software Foundation had to agree that they would not operate any programs that advance or promote DEI, not just within the funded project, across the entire organization. And if they violated that condition, the government could claw back money already spent. So imagine this scenario. You're a small nonprofit. You hire staff, you sign contracts, you spend money, and then months later, someone decides you violated a vaguely defined ideological clause, and then your money's gone. That's not funding. That's a financial hostage situation with paperwork. And this is where the first bad take usually enters the chat. So let's talk about what the grant was not. It was not money for DEI initiatives. It was not money for marketing, money for conferences, money for unicorn floaties. It was for supply chain security. Right now, PI is mostly reactive. And so bad packages go out, someone notices it, and so that means the damage has already been done. And the proposed project would have built tooling for automated analysis, malware pattern detection, and proactive defense, which if you use Python professionally, helps you. Also, if you work in Linux environments, it will help you. And if you care about open source security, this was objectively good work. So when someone frames this as Python choosing politics over code, that framing only works if you don't mention what the code was for, which is very convenient, I might say. So let's ground this right fast. When you run pip install whatever package, you are trusting the maintainer, the index, the review pipeline. Now, imagine an automated system that flags suspicious behavior, obfuscated payloads, known malware signatures. That's what this grant funded, not slogans, actual tooling. So yes, losing that funding has real consequences. And no, yelling about marketing photos does not mitigate malware. Trust me, I checked. All right, now let me address these weird arguments. And this is where the tone gets educationally spicy, so to speak. I keep hearing this claim that DEI means discrimination. This one gets repeated a lot, and it always sounds very serious. But in open source, DEI usually means accessibility, global participation, documentation clarity, community safety. It does not mean excluding people, quotas, or banning some white dude from keyboards. Open source is international by default. If you don't actively think about inclusion, you accidentally exclude people. That's not ideology, that's system design. All right, before we move on to the next claim, I want to pause here because this is the part that always gets skipped. People argue about DEI like it appeared out of thin air in the last 10 years, like it's some random corporate invention and not a response to very real, very deliberate policy choices that shaped people's lives for decades. And I want to explain this not as some pundit, but as someone whose family lived through the consequences. Now, to understand why DEI exists at all, you have to understand the history. I'm not talking about vibes or memes or YouTube summaries, the actual history. Now, in a second, I'm going to play a clip. This is Lee Atwater, a Republican political strategist, speaking candidly about what's known as the Southern Strategy. Now, this strategy that became prominent during the Nixon era and was refined during the Reagan years. What makes this clip important is that this isn't a critique talking. This is the architect explaining the design. And when people say DEI is discrimination, or why are we still talking about race? This clip answers that question better than I ever could. So let's watch.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me, it's hard. You start out in 1954 by saying, by 1968 you can't say that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like force busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you get so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Crazy, right? That clip is very uncomfortable, but it's honest. Atwater explains how explicit racism became politically unpopular. So the language changed. Not the goal, but the language. Instead of saying racial slurs, they talked about states' rights, law and order, or cutting taxes, and also welfare dependency. All technically neutral phrases, but all disproportionately harmful in practice. And that wasn't accidental. That was the strategy. Now, my dad is in his 70s. He lived through segregation, redlining, underfunded schools, limited job access, not because anyone told him you're not allowed to succeed, but because policy was designed to make sure some people always started behind. And that didn't just affect him, it affected where my family could live, what schools were available, what wealth could be passed down. And that's how structural issues work. They don't announce themselves, they compound. So when people hear DEI and immediately jump to, oh, so you're discriminating now. No, DEI exists because for decades, policy quietly discriminated first. DEI is not about giving unqualified people jobs. It's about removing artificial barriers, also widening access, and making sure systems don't quietly keep reproducing the same outcomes. And it's almost like some people can't handle that. And in open source, that looks like better documentation or safer communities, global participation, accessibility, not quotas, not exclusion. Now, here's where this becomes very current, because the same rhetorical playbook hasn't disappeared. It's been rebranded. What we're seeing today, including under Project 2025, is a return to neutral language, efficiency, anti-ideology framing, while proposing policy that remove civil protection, centralize executive power, weaken enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, just like before. The language sounds clean, the impact is not. And this isn't abstract to me. I mean, this affects my kids, possibly my grandkids, and also the kind of country they will inherit. And that's why this conversation matters to me. Now, let me bring this back to tech and open source. When an organization like the Python Software Foundation says, we are willing to sign away our ability to support inclusion, that's not radical. That's informed. That's understanding history well enough to say, we've seen where vague restrictions lead. This is why pretending DEI is just virtue signaling is intellectually lazy. It ignores why these safeguards exist in the first place. So when someone mocks phrases like Python is for everyone without understanding the historical context that made such statements necessary, they're not being edgy. They're being incomplete, which brings us to the next claim. Now, the second claim I saw was about the slogan that Python uses. Python is for everyone, and that it's meaningless. This one made me pause the video for a minute, because apparently we've reached a point where saying this thing is for everyone is interpreted as exclusionary. So by that logic, Linux is for everyone should be offensive, right? Or open source is for everyone. That should be very suspicious. What about public libraries or for everyone? That must be propaganda, right? I mean, come on, it's not a declaration of superiority. It's a rejection of gatekeeping, which it seems like you guys want to go back to. But I'm gonna leave that for another video. And no, it does not imply that JavaScript has a race requirement. We don't need to stretch that hard. And there was another claim I heard, it was like marketing photos prove discrimination. I mean, this is where things really go off the rails. Counting faces in marketing photos is not analysis, I'm sorry. It's vibes. Marketing teams select imagery. They are not conducting census surveys. And more importantly, marketing imagery is not policy. It's not bylaws. It's not governance. It's not evidence of discrimination. If your strongest argument relies on tallying faces instead of reading documents, that should trigger some self-reflection.
One of the most damaging things about like racism and white supremacy is it puts this lens on things that people aren't virtuous because they're not white. Right? Their lack of virtue is because they're not white. And then when it starts affecting white people, it's like, well, hold up. I don't have white privilege. It's like, no, you got tricked. And the better that these other groups start to perform, if they rise above you and you haven't been resilient because you've been virtuous just because of the basis of your skin color, then you miss the point of like, you for one, you don't know history. The Reconstruction era post-abolition of slavery, we start to see that black people were formulating their own middle class. This is where all these Black Wall Streets and these...
And they shut it down real quick.
They shut it down quick because black people had all the skills. And then it's like, hold on, well, what the fuck is that? I can't get a job because I can't compete. And capitalism is supposed to be about competition until it's not benefiting the people that it was designed to benefit. So for me, we have to continue to address these things through the lens of how they were created. People may feel some type of way. Nobody wants to feel like a villain, but it's like, I'm not trying to villainize you. You have to be honest about your participation in these things.
Now, here's where I need to get serious. When you have a large audience, you are shaping how people understand events. If you misrepresent funding terms, ignore primary sources, collapse nuance into outrage, you are not informing people. You are performing certainty, and your audience deserves better than that. And I'm pretty sure you guys know who I'm talking about in this video. And I decided to not mention this guy's name anymore. But like I've said in the past, I really enjoyed his content back in the day. But since he's went down this path, I'm good. And it's nothing against the guy. And I know he probably doesn't care about me. That's fine. I don't care about you either. But bro, like, quit spreading misinformation by constantly lying to your audience. So what should we take away from this? For developers, I recommend you read the original statements. Understand how foundations operate. Don't outsource your thinking. Don't lean on content creators to explain things to you. Read it for yourself. Don't even trust me. Whenever I put something in front of you, go read it for yourself. And for open source communities, funding always has strings. Autonomy matters. Also, values are part of infrastructure. Now back to these content creators, explain before reacting. Please, humor should clarify, not replace fact. Accuracy beats virality long term. You can disagree with DEI, you can critique messaging, but if you're wrong about what happened, you should probably fix that before hitting publish. But you do what you want. Now, the Python Software Foundation didn't choose discrimination. They chose not to sign a document that gave external control over their entire mission. They chose autonomy. And the Python community responded the most open source way possible. They funded it themselves. That's not weakness. That's community governance in action. If we care about open source, we have to defend truth, context, and yes, occasionally calling out nonsense when it shows up wearing confidence like a costume. Now, if this video helped clarify things, go down and hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment down below. And if you want to support the channel, go down and hit up my store. It's store.keepitechie.com. I got some nice shirts over there, nice hats, dead hats or whatever over there. So check those out. But I'm genuinely curious, where do you think the line is between funding and control? But anyway, I'm Josh, this is KeepItTechie, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Yo, what's up, y'all? Listen, if you've been sitting there thinking about making a move, let me tell you, tech is where it's at. I don't care where you coming from, whether you've got a degree, a GED, or just pure hustle. There's room for you in this game. You see, tech is more than just keyboards and code. It's solving problems, creating opportunities, and building the future. You already have what it takes because tech doesn't care where you start. It cares where you're willing to go. You can teach yourself Linux, learn Python, break into cybersecurity, or even launch your own app. And the resources are out here for free. And yes, you heard me, free. Now, yeah, it's gonna take effort. You'll have to grind, but think about this. The time is gonna pass anyway. So why not invest it in a skill that'll change your life? I mean, tech doesn't just pay the bills, it opens doors to freedom, stability, and generational wealth. So stop doubting yourself, start small, stay consistent, and keep building. Because this isn't just a career, it's a movement. And guess what? You belong here. So let's get it, because the future is yours to build. Keep it techie.
Wow.